The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NBA.
Are the Nets disrespecting Cam Thomas with their latest contract offer?
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast.
We both reported on a lot of stuff that the Nets have done this offseason, but the biggest story remains now what hasn't been done, and that is Cam Thomas having no contract agreement with the Nets nearly a month into his restricted free agency. And we just got a report from Jake Fisher, NBA insider, who said that from what he knows, the Nets have not exceeded a 2-year, $28 million offer with a team option in the second year. So it has not gone beyond that. So that is the mid-level exception. 2 years, it would seem like team option in the second year. As I said, when you saw that, reacting to that offer or that reported offer that the Nets gave to Cam Thomas, is that surprising to you? And do you consider that offer a low ball or disrespectful, as a lot of people have, kind of in the outcry after that report?
Was it surprising to me that the offer wasn't higher? No, not particularly, because the Nets, as has been reported ad nauseum, are the only team really that has significant money to spend. So they're disincentivized to bid against themselves. The other issue, again, this is my perception, is that Cam, I believe, feels he is worth more than that. So it brings up the question of, well, if the Nets give him more than that, just because, right? Homegrown guy, engender goodwill, whatever, they give him another $2 million just to do it. He may still feel he's vastly underpaid. Also, I think the third factor is the Nets still have a significant sum of cap room, which I completely understand a number of Cam Thomas fans say should have immediately gone to him because he is their leading scorer and homegrown player. But the way the business of the NBA runs, you take advantage of sequencing your deals. So if you are trying to use that cap room to try to squeeze first round picks, or hell, even swaps or second round picks or whatever, young prospects, whatever, out of a team that's facing the second apron, and you're trying to take salary dumps, you need the cap room. Cam comes either last or next to last in that equation. You use the cap room, then you come back to Cam. So one, I'm not surprised that they aren't throwing higher and higher and higher offers at him to get him to sign yesterday. I don't think that's going to be a yesterday problem, a today problem, a tomorrow problem. Maybe that's a next month problem. Maybe that's a September problem. I don't think that's first and foremost. So I think they're going to start low. Cam will start high, and we'll see. But no, I'm not shocked at the amount or stunned at the amount, nor do I think it's egregiously insulting based on where Cam stands in the landscape of the NBA and what kind of market he has right now.
And that last thing you said is interesting because Cam very well may be finding this insulting. And, you look at the things that I've heard, about Cam's camp going into negotiations is that they had some allusions to some deals, like whether you want to talk about Jalen Green or Emmanuel Quickley or Jordan Poole, whoever you want to say, these guys, these younger guards who have gotten paid in the range above $30 million annually. Cam came in and said, we think we're better then these guys, as Cam said, we feel like we should be paid accordingly, like those guys. And just based on the market, that's not going to happen. And also, a lot of those deals were made before the new CBA came into play. So there's an argument to be made about whether those guys would have gotten those deals if they were dealing in this new CBA, if those negotiations had happened in this new CBA. So that brings in an interesting question of, how is Cam viewing this offer from the Nets? Like you said, if the Nets give him a few extra $1 million as a show of goodwill, does that really make a difference? Because if Cam's at $30 million and the Nets are at $14 million, they go up to $16 million. Is that really making all that much of a difference? So, it's kind of tough to say. But when you look at that offer, do you view this as a situation where the Nets are here, Cam Thomas is there, or there could be a meet in the middle? Or do you think that this is going to be a hard line of the Nets of nobody can offer you more than this $14 million non-taxpayer mid-level exception, and we're not going to go above that?
Well, I guess it depends on what you feel meeting in the middle is, right? And I guess that goes to what we're saying. I talked to somebody who knows Cam fairly well, and 3 names that were discussed. He does not feel, meaning Cam, I'm led to believe he does not feel that he is any inferior a player to Tyler Hero, and you mentioned quickly, and RJ Barrett, right? 27, 31, etc. He doesn't feel he's inferior to any of those players. You also correctly point out that this is a different landscape, right? So if he thinks he's that good, thus he should get paid that much, and the qualifying offer is what it is, the Nets offer reportedly is what it is. Meeting in the middle, if you're saying meeting in the middle means 22, 23 million, 24 million, my supposition is that that's unlikely. Do I still think Cam will be playing in a Nets uniform? Probably. But if you're saying meeting in the middle is literally splitting the difference between 14 and 31, no, I don't think that's likely.
And, it brings in the question of what does this say about how the Nets are viewing Cam Thomas? Because I talked about this with numerous salary cap people, like executives and things along the lines going into the offseason, and asked them, do you think Cam Thomas will get something in the $20 to $30 million range? And a lot of them said maybe in the low 20s. That's what they felt. And I brought up the point, well, the Nets don't have to pay him that, because if nobody has cap space, nobody can go above $14 million. So they don't have to do that. So I asked them, and I was like, so that would pretty much just be like a showing of goodwill to them to give him that much above that non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And they were like, yeah, but when you have a player who you like, you don't typically try to squeeze them and just, put them down to the lowest amount that you could possibly give them. And right now, up to this point, it kind of seems as if that's the way the Nets are operating. So it brings into question of how are the Nets viewing Cam Thomas, and what does this say about him? Because you would think if they viewed him as this guy, as Cam views himself as this guy, a future core piece, a future starter, would they be risking squeezing him and, him potentially taking the qualifying offer? It doesn't seem like it. So to you, does this say a lot about how you think the Nets are viewing Cam as a potential long-term piece?
Well, look, I would never dare to speak for Sean Marks or Josiah. What I would say is this. I presume if the Nets saw Cam Thomas as, I'm not even going to say a first-team All-NBA player. I'd say if the Nets viewed him as an all-star, potential all-star player, a potential $35 million player, we probably wouldn't be having these discussions. I presume they would pay him. I also have to listen. Now, granted, I know I always come on here and I say, don't listen to what they say, just watch what they do. I know I say that. But when I listen to both Jordy describe the players that he's looking for and how he wants to play, and when I listen to Sean describe the players that they're looking for and how they want to play, 0.5 second basketball or half second basketball, multi-positional defense, length, quick processing, ball movement. I listen and I process this and I think, well, man, you listed 5, 6 strengths, and I'm waiting to hear ISO scoring or waiting to hear bucket about to happen. I'm waiting to hear, individual gravity. And by the way, these are things that Cam is great at. And I don't hear these words flying out of either one of their mouths. Okay, well, then if I'm going to take you at your word, it makes me think, while you appreciate Cam's abilities and you respect him and you honor what he's good at, it may not be the exact archetype that you're looking for going forward.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that quote that you just referenced from Sean Marks, I asked Sean about the players that they picking, 3 international ball handlers, people presumed as point guards, also Danny Wolf, guys who needed the ball in their hands, and a lot of pass first guys. And I asked Sean about it, and he said, as you said, 0.5 second basketball, the ball doesn't stick, it moves. And then the other thing was big guys, size, positional versatility, guys who make things hard on defense. And I wrote a piece yesterday about Cam Thomas, and I said, if you were looking to describe the antithesis of Cam Thomas thus far in his career, 0.5 second basketball and guys who are versatile defensively and makes things hard on that end, that is not Cam Thomas whatsoever. So you have a lot of people who say actions over words, but in the Nets case, I think we have words and we have a action in what they haven't offered Cam thus far, which I think says something about how they're viewing him. Because as you said, if they viewed him as this all-star level player, as he presumably views himself, they would not be risking him taking the qualifying offer. They would not be squeezing him down to the mid-level exception. They would want to keep him in the building at whatever cost. But, actions over words, it doesn't seem like up to this point that's how they're viewing him.
Ever wished managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz.
We start with Ace Bailey, because that's where everybody wants to start. What are we looking for in the upcoming season from Ace, and what would you view as successful to make us believe he can be the guy? Stats, field, defense, player comp, anything really. So from a stats standpoint, I expect he'll probably not have a particularly good year. If you go back and look at some of the best offensive players to ever play the game and kind of go to them at similar stages in their career, Tracy McGrady was like a 23% three-point shooter and was like a 44% shooter, which was actually pretty good and barely played. And then Kevin Durant, who I actually think is probably the best comp to kind of the situation. Durant was ended up playing 80 games and 35 minutes a night as a 19-year-old on the last Seattle Supersonic team that was not good. And while Durant won Rookie of the Year, he shot 43% and 29% from three. He averaged 20 points a game. That obviously would be a fabulous year. So the first thing I would say is I would suspect that you'll see a very low shooting percentage. And then the second thing is that Ace Bailey has to learn shot selection, having had really bad shot selection in college, and he'll still have, it's not going to just go away. So he's going to have to learn that, which I think will lead him to having even worse shooting percentage along in that way. I mean, if you look back to that 07-08 Seattle Supersonic team, Durant has Earl Watson plays the second most amount of minutes on that team. And then Nick Collison, then Jeff Green, then Chris Wilcox, Kurt Thomas, Damian Wilkins. That's a bad team. And that's kind of what we are. They went 20-62 under PJ Carlesimo. I suspect we're similar. Now we have Lowry which will relieve some of that burden. But Seattle really just threw Durant out there. And that's Oklahoma City now, which seems to be the model. So we may do the same with Ace Bailey. We may just throw him out there for 30 minutes a night and make him survive. So then the second one I would say is I do think flashes matter. And periods of time, if he's going to be the guy, periods of time in which he dominates. Can he dominate for a few plays? Then can he dominate for a few minutes? Then does he ever have a dominant quarter? Does he ever have a dominant half? Those would be the things I think you're looking for in that. And the thing that jumped out the most in his summer league play was the way he literally just had such incredible effort the whole time. So, and I don't know how he's going to manage an NBA season, but can he play with that same zest and that effort and that tenacity on both sides of the ball? Because I thought that was where he jumped out and his just ability to do things. I think the flashes and effort would be my first two, which is not a great one. You'd rather have me tell you, there is a chance he goes and averages 20 points a game. Like we have to score. We're going to score 100 points a night and someone has to average them. I mean, if you suddenly start down our 10-man roster and start to try to allocate the points and you start with Lowry at 25 and now you try to get the next 75 done and you give Keontae 18, well, Ace Bailey may get there very quickly to be at 17 or 18 points a game because somebody has to score them. So that would be it. I would suspect he shoots about 40%. I'm going to guess he shoots about 32% from three, is wildly inefficient, scores a lot of points, and has a lot of flashes. And that would answer, since we didn't see much of Ace, what do you expect his rookie season and what do you think success looks like for him? I think I answered that. How confident are you that the Jazz can keep Ace Bailey around past his rookie contract? So I understand that Jazz fans, with what's happened in our history, we are very insecure about this. I would just say it's not like Ace Bailey is not coming to Utah deciding I'm only going to be here for X amount of years. And if there's anything about Ace Bailey that jumped out in his short time in summer league, if you're around him, it's just kind of how gregarious and happy he is. It's not who he seems to be at all. So, there might be people in his camp that think like, okay, well, we'll get out of Utah and then we'll get our big deal somewhere else. But I can promise you that there's nobody there's nothing about Ace Bailey. It's pre-decided what's going to happen here. So it has to do with what his experience is here, how much he likes it, how much he enjoys it, how he's treated, how he succeeds, but it is not pre-decided in any way, shape, or form at this point. If the Jazz front office knew this is where they'd be 3.5 years later after trading Rudy and Donovan, do you think they'd do things the same way? Super interesting question. I wonder two things. We got kind of caught in the middle in the first 2 years. It's harder to unload an entire roster than you would think. So the kind of question goes back to the Russell Westbrook trade that we didn't make, of whether we should have made that in the offseason and unloaded Mike and Boyan and a bunch of players at that point. So you should really have cleared the entire roster, right? They traded Royce, and then they traded Donovan, and they traded Rudy. And then it took them a while. They did Boyan, and then I think he requested that. And then they got Mike done after that, midway through the season. And so it took a little while to get everything done. Would they, in retrospect, have done that faster? Okay, that would be question one. And then obviously Lowry was way better than anyone expected, and we were better than anyone expected. And Will had everyone playing really, really well. And so you guys got caught. And then we had that end of the season draft positioning. And then that leads to the second question, is like the second season, do you wish you had done this early, where you had unloaded, you acquired John Collins and maybe you didn't need to, and then you unload some of those pieces like you did this offseason to get into that, kind of clear your direction. So if we had done those two things differently, which I think are the two things you could have done differently, I don't know that we're actually in a totally different situation. The first, you would have less, we'd be less good. And then the question is whether we would have gotten, far better draft picks is really what you're saying. And so if we look back in the 2003 draft, where we end up with Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George, and it's our pick that gets us Taylor Hendricks. If we had cleared the deck faster and drafted somewhere in there where we had Scoot Henderson, Amon Thompson, Asur Thompson, Anthony Black, Bilal Coulibaly, or Jarice Walker, is that different? I mean, obviously you got Victor. That's the Victor draft, but so you don't win the lottery. And you're having either Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Amon Thompson, Asur Thompson, Anthony Black, Bilal Coulibaly, Jarice Walker, and Taylor Hendricks. But you've cleared the deck. You've cleared the deck. You don't have Colin Sexton. You don't have Jordan Clarkson. You don't have John Collins. You did all that earlier. Are we that much further along? And then in the 2024 draft is the worst draft we may have ever seen. So we get Cody at 10. Had we drafted earlier, like if we have Ron Holiday, Tajon Salon, Donovan Clingan, Zach Edey, Rob Dillingham, maybe Stephen Castle, Alex Sarr, are we that different? I think we kind of go into this last draft and we end up with Ace Bailey. And I think we're in I think we could have done this in a different route. And we might have better player than Taylor Hendricks, and we might have a better player than Cody Williams. In theory, by draft position. But I don't know that we'd be in any different position than what we're in right now. This is hard. And we went down the road the day we traded Donovan and Rudy. So I'm not sure that that's it. And if the question is, if we know where we're going to be 3.5 years later, would have we traded Donovan and Rudy? I think we knew where we were going to be. I think we knew this was going to be hard.
We've all been there, locking on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with killer last-minute deals. Tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal? Gametime Zone Deal picks the best seats in your section for you. And with Gametime, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. Take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now, every once in a while, Keith, while we're talking, something just pops into the conversation that I just did not anticipate popping into the conversation. And yesterday, the question that we got into, and you wrote an article involving this question on Inquirer.com, but it was the article on NBA.com ranking the teams in the Eastern Conference, and they ranked the Sixers at number 7 in the Eastern Conference. And the big question that was surrounding how good the Sixers could be was not based on the former MVP, the one-time MVP Joel Embiid. It was based on Paul George. So then that got my wheels turning, and then especially after reading your piece, who is the more dependable guy? If you're looking at this season, does NBA.com and the ranking the 76ers, is it more based on you can expect more and depend on more from Paul George than you can on Joel Embiid? Where do you fall in line with that question?
That's a great question. It's weird because I feel like, although I feel like Paul George is more of the wild card, right? He's more of the question mark. And the reason why I'm saying that is because when we look at Joel Embiid, we know what he brings to the table, right? We do. But we also know that Joel Embiid is always injured. Like, he goes injured every season. And that's like, it's unfortunately, that's just how it is here in Philadelphia. The question mark with Paul George is, like, who is he? Like, is he that guy who was with the Clippers 2 years ago? Or is he the guy that showed up here last season and only played in like 41 games? Is he's the guy who basically, when they go up against the Brooklyn Nets without Embiid and without Maxey, and he only finishes it with 2 points and passes what would have been the game-winning shot to Justin Edwards, right? So that's the question mark. Who is this guy? And I think that's why a lot of people are giving him attention. Now, again, let's be honest. When you think of the 76ers being successful, it's all about Joel Embiid. He is the head of the snake. But aside from that, I feel like Paul George is the big question mark, outside, because you want to know who this guy is.
Mm-hmm. It's so fascinating to me because like everything you said, like I agree with everything you said as far as Paul George and all that. But for me, the bigger question mark is Joel Embiid, because I believe there is no, and I've said this before, but I truly believe this, there is no bigger question in sports or no bigger if in sports than if Joel Embiid is healthy. Now, you could say even if he's 100% healthy, he's not going to be anything that he was. It's a matter of deterioration of skill and health. And even if he's giving you 100%, that 100% isn't the same a couple of years ago when he was the league MVP. But I look at Joel Embiid and I see this question mark of, if you have him at 100%, you have one of the most dominant players in the NBA. If you have Paul George at 100%, does he even outrank Tyrese Maxey as far as being the number one threat on this team? So for me, I assign the bigger question on Embiid. Now, with that being said, if you're looking at dependability, I can depend more on Paul George being a number 2 guy, I feel, for more games in the upcoming season than I can on Joel Embiid being the number 1 guy for really at any point this season. So for me, when it comes to dependability, the bar for me is lower for Paul George, because I think all he needs to be is be healthy and be a role player. If Joel Embiid is healthy and playing, then you're looking at a guy that I do think will at least compete to be an all-star this year. I don't think the MVP days are still there, but at least, again, an all-star this year. That's where I'm at when it comes to the Embiid versus Paul George and dependability thing. I think the bar is lower for Paul George. Now, with Paul George being the bigger question, in my opinion, but for your point, if Paul George comes back and is healthy, what is the ceiling for him? Is it an all-star, or is it the number 2 to Maxey? Is it the number 1? How good could Paul George be if everything works out in your argument for the dependability?
Well, he better be damn good. I mean, here's the thing. So here's the thing. Like, and then before I get into that, I just want to say this. Part of the reason why I also believe Paul George is the biggest question mark, and the reason being is because if you understand something, like the 76ers went out and said, we got to go out and get this guy to help us win a championship, to complement everything else. We need a guy for when Joel Embiid is unable to play. We're going to have somebody that we can run the offense through. We need a guy who's going to be able to take some of the ball handling duties off of Tyrese Maxey. And when they went ahead and picked him up, at that particular point, everyone was like, okay, this is great. People thought, he's going to be a major upgrade from Tobias Harris. Well, Tobias Harris had a better season than him last year. They looked at Buddy Hield, and again, Buddy Hield struggled when he was a 76er, but he suddenly found relearned how to shoot again when he went to Golden State, right? So when you look at all the things that the 76ers gave up for Paul George, that's why I'm saying it's like, okay, we already know what Joel is. Now you're right. Joel Embiid, he has to be 100%, but you gave up. You're in cap hell now because of Paul George, right? Because you went out there and you picked up Paul George. Now here's the deal. So how good can he be? Well, I mean, you need him to be an elite defender, right? You need him to be an elite defender. You also need him to be a guy that, who can also initiate some of the offense and do certain things. Now, again, some people may say, but he's 35 years old. He has this injury history, he has this and that. But he signed a 4-year, $211.5 million contract. He signed a max level contract. So you need Paul George to be playing at an all-star level to justify all the things that you did for him. If not, it's going to be hard to justify it for everything else, right? Or for Daryl Morey not to get criticized. I think that Yes, his numbers, I'm not expecting him to put up the numbers he put up when he was with the Clippers, because when he was there, it was just him and Kawhi. Now it's him, Embiid, and Maxey. And Maxey is in his prime right now. But I do expect him to be a stat stuffer, so to speak, steals, rebounds, assists, nice shooting percentage, things that they'll go like deflections, all that. So for him, again, he's 35, he's banged up, but he's being paid as if he's in his prime, and he has to be the missing link for the championship.
I'll put it to you like this. Defensively, yeah, I would definitely give the nod to Paul George, but in a world, and I don't think this is a drastic hypothetical. I don't think this is a dramatic hypothetical. I think this is something that could very well happen in the upcoming season. If there's a lot of games where it's Maxey and Paul George without Joel Embiid this year, who's the Sixers' number one guy? Who's the guy that's leading the charge there? Is it going to be a Maxey-led team, or is it going to be a Paul George-led team in those games?
Right now, I think in the age aspect, in the way that Maxey is the point guard, I think that what we saw was Maxey, right? But I will say this. I'm going to say this. There were certain games where, Maxey and Paul George looked great together. Paul George was the one bringing the ball up. He was initiating the offense. It allowed Maxey to get into his spots. PG was getting 30 points, things like that. Now, granted, a couple of those games were against the Charlotte Hornets, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say.
So,
32? When he dropped 32?
Yeah. So a couple of those. But at the same time, I do think that, it'll probably be Maxey. But here's the problem with all that. And what you're saying is extremely realistic. I mean, we're looking at a guy, and I hate to be repetitive, a guy who had injuries, a guy who's 35 years old. But at the end of the day, you gave up re-signing people, and there were other free agents out there. You made Paul George your number one guy. And at the end of the day, he signed a 4-year, $211.5 million contract. That's what you gave him. And so now, they've been trying to trade him. They can't. But at the same time, so with that, when we look at what Tobias Harris did, the difference between those two, and this is why George, to me, is so important and vital, why he has to be the guy, is because Tobias Harris made 5 years, a 5-year deal, 180. He was never an all-star, never made the Olympic team. He was never, the face of a franchise. They gave him a lot of money because they had to, because Jimmy Butler left, all stuff like that. Well, Paul George is a 9-time MVP, one that's going to go down as one of the best two-way players of all time. He came here to help them win a championship. Tobias Harris came here to be a piece who just happened to get paid. So when we factor those two things in, it's kind of like with all those accolades, we shouldn't be having a conversation saying that Tobias Harris had a better year than Paul George.